Let's get started. Welcome everyone. This is the 10th edition of Landa Talks. Again, this is a space here at Landa Club where we bring in very experienced like startup consultants or fractional workers that are a little bit further on the journey to basically share their experience, tactics, strategies, and sort of to help us navigate through this whole journey. We're happy to be hosting Sara Josephs today. Me and Sara connected a while ago through a mutual connection in Miami. We had a very interesting conversation, and I thought it made all the sense in the world to invite her to the podcast. For reference, she's been doing fractional work for 4 years, Sara, if I'm not mistaken.
Coming on three, but
All right. Coming on three. I guess we can start by, I don't know if you mind telling us about your background, Sara, like a brief introduction of your career and where you are right now.
sure. So my background's a little unique. I started my career out in Manhattan in investment banking for a couple of years. Knowing that I was more a people person and more entrepreneurial, I went to a couple of recruitment firms that at the end of the day recruited me to be a recruiter. I did that for about 8 years on the agency side and was looking to get my MBA. Simultaneously, a colleague of mine had said, why don't you think about getting a master's in HR? Your undergraduate background is in economics. It might make more sense. I see you doing something within the people world. So I did that. I got my master's at night and started to see the startup world booming. This was now probably 2008, 2009. I was sitting next to a lot of our technical recruiters, and those folks, I would hear them on the phone with the hottest new startup. And I said, this is really interesting. What are they doing for HR? Who are you working with, recruiter, to help with that hire, as we're placing people? And they said, gosh, we're working with the CEOs and they're so busy. And I started to think about this notion of how does HR and that recruitment presence begin in a startup? I had been working with large banks. So I slowly transitioned into, once I finished my master's, working in early stage startups, initially as a head of talent, and then moving into a head of people. I did that for 4 startups. And during that journey, I would meet founders, VCs along the way that would always ask me, when do I bring in a head of people? And in watching founders struggle with this, I might see them make the wrong hire or not bringing in somebody in a people function soon enough, surely because they didn't have the funding, or maybe we're just uneducated about that value that HR person or that people person could add.
Very interesting. And I guess, yeah, that's a perfect segue to how you made that transition into like independent consulting and fractional work. And we always ask, how was that first leap into like getting your first client, navigating through your first engagement? So that would be very interesting to learn about.
Yeah, so for me, it was, I was very lucky in how it happened. So I, at the beginning of the pandemic, knew I wanted to leave New York. And I had always had this idea that I want to go on my own. I want to be able to help more than one founder at a time. I also recognized that my skill set was taking a startup from those really early days. Generally, when I was hired in the full-time roles I was in, I was either the 15th or 16th hire, anywhere between 15 and 20, 25. Not all startups do that, but I found founders that really valued that. And I noticed that once those startups were getting to that 50, 60, 75 mark, I was just bored. I felt that it wasn't my skill set. I was more scrappy, more really thought of it at the high level strategy point. So, with the pandemic, I had left the startup I was at in New York and started to really build out a foundation of what was important to me if I were to start this consulting practice. Did, a lot of reach outs to founders while simultaneously interviewing for full-time roles. One day, about 9 months after I talked to a company, they came back to me and said, we know you're in Florida. We know you don't want to do anything full-time, or you're looking to start this own business. Would you want to consult with us? And I said, absolutely. And that was sort of me signing on my first client, formed my LLC the next day. And it really was history. It sort of kind of fell together properly. I think sometimes I like to say, in the entrepreneurial world, it's timing is a big piece of it.
That's very interesting, and I'm curious about like, how was that first engagement, right? So were you nervous? Did you make some mistakes? What did that look like, or it just felt like natural?
It was actually very interesting because that my first client was an e-commerce startup. And my background is fintech, high tech. I had worked for, an AI startup. So this was a lot less tech, if you will, and more on the creative side. So while it was also consulting and figuring out, hey, my mindset, especially from being in people operations, is to really be a part of that organization and embedded in their culture. So one of the struggles and things that I had to figure out was, how embedded am I? And, where do you find those barriers of not being a full-time employee, but also being a part of their culture? So for me and for that particular client, I very much did become a part of their culture and help shape that culture by nature of what falls into the people operations role.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and I guess that brings up an interesting question. Is obviously it's easier if you're like in the people side of things. So, but for example, if you were to advise, I don't know, like a fractional CMO about how to like blend herself or himself into the culture, what are some pointers you would give, or how do you think about that? That's very interesting.
Yeah. So I very much, and this is probably the ex-New Yorker / always a New Yorker in me, believe in radical candor. What I mean by that is really sitting down as you enter that engagement and saying to the founder, I recognize that I'm going to get to know a lot of your people, a lot of your folks. How do you want me to function? Do you want them to know or see me as a consultant? Or do you want me to leverage them like I am a part of your culture and embodied in your culture? I will say that different founders have different views. And I think it also depends on the fractional type of work that you're doing. I think by nature, somebody in the people operations space, it is more favorable to be embedded into their culture because it allows their employees to be vulnerable with you, to come to you, to talk to you. But other roles, fractional sales, for instance, may not necessarily, and this is interesting. We were talking a bit before, Pedro, about hobby. It may not necessarily be that a founder wants that fractional salesperson to know everybody in the organization. They may be building an infrastructure behind the scenes, but don't necessarily need to know everybody.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think I got a little bit like sidetracked because it was very interesting. But going back to more of like your experience in the fractional world, so I'm curious, and I think it's valuable for other people in this call to see what was your offering when you started, and what does your offering look like today? How that evolved? Have you changed? That's very interesting.
So I was, very calculated, if you will, in how I wanted to offer my services. I had talked to a number of folks from the beginning and from until now. It is on an hourly basis. And what you'll see with consultants, and I was actually just talking to a fractional marketing individual today, what you'll see is you may often have folks that are working on projects and want a founders or VCs might say, can you give a rate for that project? For me, I struggled with being or wanting to do that because within people operations, it's so much about that interpersonal, getting to know the team, getting to know what's going on. And I knew oftentimes, even when I was in my full-time roles, I would start talking to a founder about something that might be a high agenda item. And as we were having conversations, recognize that as you dug up those rocks, there was more dirt and stuff behind there that was more important to focus on. So instead of having to rewrite statements of work, I've always sort of done it in general bucket, people operations, if that client is leveraging me or my consultants as a people operations consultant, meaning the idea is to wear different hats or umbrellas. I am working with a client right now, actually a boutique law firm that was struggling. They acquired another small law firm, and they really only needed, because they're so small, they're about 8 people, coaching in terms of how to mesh the two cultures. So when writing out that statement of work, that really, it's still hourly, but it's very, very narrow in scope of, kind of mapping out what the agenda is there.
Interesting. And you mentioned you have like some consultants that work with you right now. So I think that's very interesting, like for an independent who's just starting out to have that North Star. So it'd be interesting how you got to that, or you started already with like a bunch of contacts, or you built it up little by little. I'm
Yeah,
curious about that.
Sure. So for me, if you look at, the people operations HR space, I look at it and folks often break it down into HR and recruitment. My background actually is in recruitment, coming in and, as I mentioned earlier, pulling in the full HR function. I'll be perfectly honest, I do not like recruiting. I'm sort of at a point where I like more the high strategic level work, working with founders, coaching, sort of where my career has taken me. That being said, as startups get initial funding, the first thing that's really on the mind of founders is hiring and that growth. So for me, it really happened naturally. I was working with a client where I got in from a recruiting perspective, and they were leveraging me recruiting for junior roles. And I said to them one day, guys, like, I have a model that I'd like to propose to you. Really, I'm billing you too much to be recruiting for these junior roles. And what my model there was is, let me bring in a junior recruiter from my network. And one thing I will say is, any of the consultants I work with, and they are all 1099, have a background in startups. I think it's really, really important if you're scaling a fractional business and working generally with small businesses and startups, to make sure that those folks understand how nimble startups are, how something can change within an hour. And so, I started sort of building this Rolodex of folks that I trusted, worked with, and were open to doing either a project on the side or we're working on other fractional work. So that initially started with me embedding recruiters into some of my clients, where I always oversaw and managed them, and sort of took off a little bit more where I was meeting founders that needed the fractional people support, like that, whether it's employee relations, managing the PEO, but didn't necessarily need somebody like myself that had, north of 10 years of experience doing it. And then also from like a price perspective.
Interesting. And I think actually a good follow-up is to double click on pricing, right? So it's a diverse offering. You're bringing in different people for different things. At first you felt that you were charging too much for certain things. So how do you think like about pricing in general? Have you started like with a rate similar to what your previous role was, or how has that evolved?
So it's interesting. I always say, and this is a joke that I have with a lot of startup founders, if you put any of your consultants, regardless of who they are, into, and I'm not sure how many of you guys in the audience have worked with PEOs or used PEOs for payroll benefits. I know you guys outside of the US may know what an employer of record is. Really a third party that's and I see Gabriel nodding his head, managing payroll benefits, the real administrative pieces. So I always joke with founders that your consultants, based on your, if you put in their hourly rate into your PEO or whatnot, even if you're not paying them through that system, they're always going to look like the highest salaried employee in the company. And that's by nature of the specificity of the work that that person is doing, as well as also generally a lot of consultants do not have equity in the startup, as well as not taking benefits from the startup. So for me, I knew generally what the range was. And if you were to average it out to what a salary might have been before, quite honestly, it is significantly higher, close to 2 or 3 times that. But there's a lot of factors that play into that, because in all of my full-time roles, I had significant equity.
Yeah, makes sense. And actually, that brings up also another interesting question. So do you charge in equity at all?
So quite frankly, I don't. And, this is not always the most favorable response, but like I said, I'm pretty direct. Because I deal with very early stage startups, the chance of those early stage startups, having that exit or, IPOing, whatnot, is very small. And we know that. Anybody in the startup world knows it's about finding that unicorn. Selfishly, if I do start working with a startup that I feel is going to be that next unicorn, I may, and if I'm the person that's actually working on the client, I may negotiate with the founder, how about I drop my, hourly rate, let's work something out on the equity side. You see more often, the fractional financial folks having equity in those startups. Really because those are folks that can stay with the startup for a longer period of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a great point that also, like, once you're in and you're seeing like the company in action, so to speak, you can always like renegotiate like whenever you extend, right?
Absolutely. And I think by nature, me specifically in the people space, I touch on all aspects. So I really get to know the deep and dirty, all the dark, dirty secrets that are happening behind the scenes. So when that's happening, I'm able to shift my business, whether it be the hours I'm giving or my consultants, based on the needs or where that company is at.
Interesting. And just quick mention to everyone in the call, I just have like a couple more questions and I'll open it up to the audience. So my next question would be, Sara, and I'm switching gears a little bit,
Sure.
how do we approach like lead generation now that like it's a like growing business for a long time, and maybe we could specifically zoom in on the importance of networks that we just touched on at first, but the general question about lead generation.
Yeah. So I have a lot I can say about this, and our conversation prior to this call, we were talking a little bit about the fractional network, and while I actually just I'm a New Yorker by background, spent about a year in the Bay Area, and had a large network in New York, but never really worked with any fractional folks there. I moved to Miami and actually started my business here in Miami and South Florida. So by nature of wanting to know the tech ecosystem here, I started meeting a lot of people and started stumbling upon a lot of fractional, whether it was marketers, finance, any function within the startup space. And we started to build this network. And there's a lot of referrals that happen between those networks, or even alongside while I'm at a client, they may have already have a fractional finance person. We get to know each other by nature of the work we do. And there's a lot of referrals happening that way. That's a very big natural lead gen. Secondly, I have found that for me, a lot of the time, especially people operations, it's about relationships, getting to know folks. I spend a lot of time going to events. Part of the reason this talk was rescheduled was I absolutely had no voice last week. I was sick, and then going into Miami Art Basel, where I was telling Pedro, like 5 tech events every day, different VCs, and always have seen that be more fruitful and kind of building those relationships. It may not be a client right away, but 3, 6, 9 months down the road, those connections that you made start turning into leads. You help them. One piece of advice I would give to other fractional folks is pay it forward. You never know, by just making an introduction to somebody that you thought of, you met a fractional finance person and somebody was looking to speak to someone in finance, and by paying it forward and making that connection, you never know when it's going to come back to, be fruitful for you. It's the notion of go-givers. There's a book that we read, a startup community I'm in, and it's really about, if you continue to pay it forward, the rewards are going to be there for you. And then, I think the final piece of lead gen is I do use, and I'd actually love to know if anyone else in the audience uses Apollo.io for lead gen. I think of it as sort of like the baby Salesforce, and have some standard templates that I sent out, cadences to founders or startups that I see that got recent funding.
Thanks for that. And for visibility, we use Apollo as well. I think Danielle is saying that he does too.
Yeah.
So
I actually just had, and I was super frustrated because I have somebody helping me with my lead gen now. Actually, this was yesterday, the day before. I would get a note on LinkedIn, and I had no clue what happened, but I would try to send an email out. Pedro, Daniel, I'm sure you can appreciate this. And it would tell me that LinkedIn has now put me on an A/B testing.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Apollo no longer supports this. And the hardest part of a system like Apollo, which is obviously a lot cheaper than Salesforce, is it's very hard to get somebody in customer service. So for 2 days, I'm like, what if I had a bigger team? Like, they wouldn't be able to do anything. So, and those can be the struggles of startups working with startup products.
That's very interesting, and thanks for sharing that. That also made me like wonder about, and I think that's interesting for everyone in the audience. Like, you obviously wear a lot of hats, and you're also doing the work with the client. So I'm wondering about like time management. I don't know if you mind walking us through what your days look like. How do you balance like I don't know, lead generation activities, doing the work, and even like checking up and managing other consultants?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's definitely probably been one of those struggles that took me a little bit of time on how to set the right boundaries to be able to do that. For me, in a perfect world, my goal long term, and it's not where I'm at now, is to be 25% of my time billable, and another 75, and the other 75% of my time managing my consultants, as well as just being out meeting venture capitalists, founders, whomever I'd be getting the business from. At one point, I was probably about 100% billable and another 25, 50% doing lead gen. So pretty much working, 14-hour days, of which I said, I live in Miami. This is, I'm not going to continue down this path. It's a balance. I think, currently I'm, kind of at that 50-50 mark. I think as you grow, you're going to see that change. But I've heard from other consultants, if you are the type of fractional person that still wants to be hands-on with clients as you're growing, it should really be about that. I'm going to say 60-40. Some people say 75-25, but 60% on the ground billable with another 40%, with the other 40%, meeting with outside folks. Obviously, that's going to change based on the size of your organization.
That's very interesting, and you also bring up a great point that it is a lot of work, especially at first. I think sometimes like people who want to take the plunge think, okay, I have a great background and like it's gonna like I'm gonna figure it out very easily, and yeah, it does take work and knocking on doors and working very hard at first. So yeah, I think my last question is, before I open it up to the audience, is if you had like one piece of advice you would give to someone about to take the plunge or about to start doing, like, call it independent consulting or fractional work, or like independent in some capacity, what would that be and why?
Yeah. And to all the folks on the call, Pedro and I did not talk about this question before, but I am going to use, sort of a pitch about Landa. My best piece of advice is leverage your network, and not just people that are in the space that you're in, other fractional folks, other people that have done what you're doing before. And I say this because recently, a couple months ago, I started working with a coach who, his joke with me is, Sara, I've worked with founders where the top 3 executives in the company, you add their ages together and I'm older than them. That shows you how long I've been doing this. I regret not engaging with him sooner. For me, my business got very, very busy, and I didn't want to stop because it was great. It's, the money was coming in, but it got to a point where my time was being so demanded by clients that I knew it wasn't setting me up for success for the future, in terms of, like we just talked about, that balance of, heads down with clients, and then the other balance of keeping your pipeline going. So, always kind of keep abreast of where you are, leverage your network. If you feel as though you don't have that balance of you're giving too much time on the client side or too much time on the sales side, try to figure out what you can do to help flip that.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And well, a lot of questions coming up in my head, but I'll just open it up. So anyone like in the audience, if you have a question, you can leave it in the chat, or even better, feel free to like open your mic and chip in. Well, let's see.
Let's see. Let's try this. So I think I'm in a similar boat, so to speak. And what I mean is, I started off like as an independent consultant ages ago. This is not something new to me in terms of Landa. I took Landa more of an opportunity to grow my network and kind of connect with people. But one of the things that we've kind of hit is we grew organically for like almost 10 years. Not a single, even like, we started doing outreach when we raised capital and tried to do something else, not because of our original business. And one of the things we bumped into, and I think there's a lot of reasons why this happened, but nowadays we're not getting as many referrals as we used to. We're not getting as many organic leads as we used to. Like in the past, I would get, I don't know, like 7 leads per week at least, without even trying, right? So as long as I close 20%, that's good enough. And one of the things that we're bumping into right now is it's a bit tougher, and we're not getting as many leads as we wished. And I guess the other part I wanted to kind of mention is, we went from, like 0 employees, I mean, not super huge, but we went to like 50 employees. It was about 8 years. But one of the things that we bumped into is that the more that you grow your business, and this particularly applies to consulting, like 90% of your costs are, your team, right? So it gets even harder to kind of sustain that growth, because you're now trying to, like, it's not as simple as just going for startups, right? Now you have to go for enterprise, because the deals need to be larger, they need to be longer to sustain growth. And we've kind of had success. Like, we've had some of the largest companies in the world work with us, but I'll say that 99% of those deals came because of contact, right? Like, I literally was,
Sure.
chatting it up with a friend, and he's like, "Oh, you do that? That's fantastic. Let's, give it a shot." What would you say, or what would your recommendations be? Like, we want to drive that, and I mentioned the use of Polo, and we've tried that, but we've had like mixed results. So any advice on kind of like how to improve a pipeline in a stage where, there's an actual team and like a big team and, you need enterprise deals, just want to see what your thoughts are.
So I kind of want to pop back because I think my response, and this is probably the fact that I am a people HR person, and when I work with teams, I want to understand how that team is functioning. What is your exact business? What fractional work?
Perfect question. Right. So we are a custom software development company.
Okay.
We offer, anything ranging from, your design sprints, just kind of validating your idea, landing pages, UX, UI, the front end, back end, everything. Like we actually build end-to-end startups. We've even built startups that ended up in Y Combinator. And we also build teams. So we also recruit for them, because one of the things that we noticed was that when they kind of graduated from being, the solopreneur, we built their company, they didn't know how to operate it. They didn't have a team. So we recruited everything for them. So we essentially are like a venture builder, if we want to kind of summarize it.
Got it. So, and this may not be the most favorable response, but one thing that I've thought a lot about, with my business, and as my business started to take off and I would meet different people, is know your strengths. That's another piece of advice, Pedro. Know your strengths, know what you're good at, and don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to say no if it's something that you don't feel that you can do. So I think as markets shift, Daniel, I would think about, what are we really good at the core? Where did we start? And does it make sense, potentially downsizing some folks that are in a role that may not be your strongest suit? And does it make sense to become almost even more narrow niche as to what you do, but open yourselves up to being able to work with different types of clients? So I'll kind of relate that to my business. So I know that I don't do well, and I can't help coach any consultants in a company that has reached, 100 people, let's say max. I was working with a client, or I was brought into a client that was, 200 people plus. I was brought on because I knew somebody that was there and recommended. And, after about a month into that engagement, I said, I'm going to be honest with you. One, this is not my strength. Two, I think you can find somebody far more junior than myself to help you with that project. And found somebody in my network, did not, charge them a fee or anything. Later came back to me and said, you were right. We really appreciate that. And from there have gotten 2 clients out of just knowing my strength and knowing what I couldn't do, and helping that client understand where to find a better resource.
That sounds perfect. It's something that we've actually done, by the way. Like, even though I mentioned we do a lot of things, we used to do even more. So we've already kind of narrowed down. But nonetheless, I think it's one of the things that I'm doing right now. And I guess it's a shout out to Pedro and Gabriel. I literally kind of gave them the same homework that I'm doing, so that they can also do kind of, their pitch of, I do this for this type of, companies, ideally, so that we can kind of show or like surface what each founder is thinking, like what each one's considering, what their strengths are. And so we can kind of narrow down what the offering of the business is based on what we are, as you said, strong at. So thank you, sir.
Sure. And this is a question that's really close to my heart. Yesterday, I was having lunch here in Miami with a benefits broker. And we were kind of talking, and obviously everyone's talking about venture funding not being in excess like it was. I have feelings on that. But, really, how do you keep yourself marketable to where the market is? Where do you find that? And something I've honestly had not thought about until sort of seeing the market change and being in Miami, meeting different types of PEOs and third parties that don't just service tech startups, which was always my bread and butter. The more AI involved, the more, involved me in this organization. I started thinking about, what my skill set was, and being able to, know that I can help small restaurant chains, or I can work with, smaller businesses, because the philosophies are the same, and you kind of can take those philosophies and translate that into smaller businesses. Obviously, Daniel, for something like what you do, a little bit different, where you kind of talked a little bit about not just startups, but enterprises. For me, it's sort of, I would never look at enterprise tech, but have to think about where else that skill set can be leveraged.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Do you have anyone else who wants to ask a question?
I got one, Sarah, around lead generation in general. You do a lot of networking. I feel like that's usually the biggest source for everybody. But so what are some of your kind of practical tips on how to approach, friendly chats so folks are aware of you kind of doing consulting work without it being like too transactional? Like, what are some maybe like one-liners that have worked for you in the past?
This is a great question, and I had a very big lesson learned on this last week. I think getting involved in your community and understanding what's going on in your community. So I am the founder of South Florida's chapter of Startup Experts, which is a network of heads of people, heads of finance, heads of operations. It started in the Bay Area, but it's a very curated, specific niche. So when I meet venture capitalists or when I meet a founder, I often will leverage that as, here's something I can give you, not I'm asking for your money. Here's a way I can help folks in your network, and sort of have a natural transition come from that. I was always taught, and big lesson I had to learn in my career, because I like to talk, is listen. You can get so much information from listening. If you meet a founder, if you meet a VC, understand who they are, not just professionally, but personally, and then start asking questions of, well, would this be helpful or would that be helpful? But the key part is, people do like to talk about themselves. Allow them to do that.
Makes sense. Joshua, do you have a question?
Go ahead, Joshua.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. Full disclosure, I'm friends with Sarah for many years. We met in the Bay Area. She's awesome. But I think it's an important, I'm a startup founder, just a little background, kind of bare knuckles boxing, problem solving. That's what I like to do. My question is for Sarah. Sarah, when does the startup need a Sarah, right? When is it like, okay, look, we're this little tiny family, this little like elite SEAL team 6 of 4 people. And when do we need a fractional people person? And then when do we need a full-time people person? We're like, at what point is it like, all right, listen, we can't do this anymore. We got to find someone who's going to help us. And I'll just say, this question comes from a lot of trauma. If you make a bad hire, it's not just like, oh boy, we paid someone a lot of money to be awful. No, it's way more than that. It's exponentially higher than that. Making bad hires is the single most regrettable thing I've ever done as a startup founder. So when is it time for a Sarah? Sarah?
So I think every founder should have the name or know somebody that can be within an arm's reach of being able to answer a people question, a legal question, or finance question. These are sort of key fundamentals in an organization that, even if you can't hire those people right then and there, have a phone number to call. So like you talked about, Josh, and you and I have had conversations when you were 5 people. There may be a point where you are 5 people and you need to have a conversation, just an hour conversation with someone like myself of, I'm having problems navigating my co-founder. What can I do? I think in terms of, there's always going to be that hour, 2 hour, 3 hour potential need, regardless of the size you are. As you hit, I'll say a round of funding, but more as you're kind of hitting a growth where you're adding on a lot of headcount, the number that people like to use is 1 people person to 50 employees. That's sort of a rough thing. You see startups that have 25 employees, but three recruiters and an HR folk, because they're going through aggressive growth. I think it's understanding what your key issues are. if you start and avoid HR debt, Josh, by knowing somebody and knowing the right person to bring in when you start to hit those issues, you can wait a little bit longer to bring in that person.
Useful. I'll give you just a little bit, and this is kind of my favorite game to play with Sarah when we talk, is from the other side of the table. There is some math that I'm doing in my head where if we're paying $30,000 to $40,000 for each hire from a recruiter, we can justify a people person. And I know you hate recruiting, Sarah, but I'm just kind of showing you the other side of the table. We can justify a well-compensated people person if they're willing to do the recruitment as well. So there's a lot of different capacities in which you can look at this, but and also just because it's going to drive me crazy if I don't say it, I know what Apollo emails look like, and I delete every single one of those. Every time it's like, oh, congratulations on your recent round of funding. Congratulations on getting deleted into my spam box.
Did my email last night get deleted?
I don't know. I probably deleted it automatically, but yes, be careful with Apollo. It's the siren song of marketing. I'm a big fan of spear phishing. So look, find the founders, get in touch with them, be like, listen, I have a unique value proposition for you. If you're going to go play that game, do it right. But if you want to go spray and pray, that works too.
This is actually a great question I want to ask Josh, because I think it will help some of the folks in the audience. How do you feel about fractional folks or folks reaching out to you directly on LinkedIn versus email? Will they, hear me out, will they stand a chance of hearing back from you if it was personal sent to LinkedIn, or does it really matter and depend on your needs?
I was the biggest LinkedIn fan 2 years ago, and now it's become overrun with spam and people trying to sell me stuff. So I don't use LinkedIn anymore. Occasionally I'll go on there and like write a post, but I don't know if you're familiar with the term broetry, where it would be like, this one time my kid asked me a question, 2 lines, and my question to the kid was this, 2 lines. And then, right, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Broetry ruined LinkedIn, and I'm a poetry major. So it's useless. I don't do LinkedIn. The best way to get in touch with me is like, find me, send me an email, or like be direct and be very, very targeted. Because if I get an email that's like, hello, Jim, I'm like, my name's Josh. Like, I have the hotkeys set up in Gmail to immediately report spam. I'm just over it. So that's the best way. But I'm always open to like direct, and like I have people text me. That's worked before. I hired a freelance firm because they texted me and they're like, hey, we saw you're looking for a PHP person. Can we help you? And I was like, I'm listening / writing. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting thing. So LinkedIn kind of rubs me the wrong way these days.
Interesting. I'd love to know how many other folks, in the Landa network have ever tried using Apollo to text or getting a phone number. Has that ever worked? Because I'd be afraid to. I mean, that's really interesting, Josh. We've never talked about that, but I would be traumatized. I mean, I have plenty of founder friends that I'll text and, ask a question to, but never to sort of market my services when I find a random.
Oddly enough, we're in the enterprise sales space, like B2B enterprise sales, and they don't want to do email. The folks that like want to buy our stuff, I pick up the phone and I call them. If you are under the age of 30 and you can pick up the phone and call someone and have a conversation with them, congratulations, you have a superpower. You have a huge advantage that nobody else your age does. It's huge. And when I get a phone call that says, not spam, and I'm like, hello, guess what? That worked. I ended up buying Datadog, God help me, because they kept calling me in like a persistent way that wasn't too annoying, and we needed their services. And I was like, all right, I need this service. God damn. Oh, so I don't know if we can curse on here. Consarn it. I guess finally you've got your deal here.
And I'm sort of the opposite. I'm honestly being stalked by Zoom every single day. And I know that, the level of Zoom I'm using for my business as I grow, I am going to need to increase it. But when I'm busy and in a groove and don't need that service at that moment, it's actually very annoying. So I probably blocked like 10 phone numbers from Zoom info because I'm like, this is enough. Stop calling me every day. So it's interesting. I think, point at different personalities attract different, styles.
and I'm pretty sure these people are getting my information from Zoom Info. So like, because it has my personal cell phone number on there and a number of other like pieces of like very direct connections to me. I'm like, all right, listen, you made it this far. Let me hear it.
That was very interesting exchange, and by the way, that was the first great question you asked, Joshua. So I'm going to steal it for next versions of Landa Talks.
Pedro, you should have me on Landa Talk. So let me be in the corner.
Oddly enough, I was going to say that I would add you on LinkedIn, but I'll get your email or just call you. So do we have any other takers? It's been like a lot of value so far. So if anyone else wants to ask a question, like feel
I
free.
actually wanted to share a bit of my experience with Apollo because I've tried it as well, and I agree that I personally don't use it to spam via email. Like we tried that, it failed, catastrophically. Like everyone hated them, and it made sense. Like I hate being on the receiving end. Yet we thought like massively maybe some would hit.
Can I just ask a question there on that? Josh, do you see something different when you get emails from it? Like, does it not look like the email I sent you last night testing it out? Doesn't it just look like it's coming from me?
No, well, and Sarah, you're right to ask this, but like, so a little background on me. I have a degree in writing, and I like to do impressions. I can smell Apollo emails. I can smell that it's like, oh, I saw you on LinkedIn and that you also went to Arizona State University. I'm like, okay, listen, Apollo email, delete. I can smell Apollo, and I think most people can. They may not be able to smell it like I can, where it's like, oh, I know what tool you're using and how you're using it. But for me, I'm like, this feels disingenuous, and they're trying to find connections and ways to talk to me. I think most people, the hair on the, like if they were a dog, and like the shackles go up on the back of a dog, that's what they feel, and that's why they're like, no, this is not going to work for me.
Is this specific to Apollo, or would this be any CRM? Because Salesforce can have a similar cadence. Is this just, I'm confused. Are we just talking about Apollo now, or are we talking about CRMs and sales cadences in general?
My hate is just for Apollo right now, but there is something to be said for a well-formed sales email, and this is where I'm going to be very contrarian. Sarah, I know, surprise. I'm very contrarian. Less is more. Give me 2 sentences. Do you want to be able to do better sales? I can show you how. Would you like to have more information? Don't give me a bunch of AI bullshit, because we are in the age of ChatGPT, where it's like, here's 6 pages of garbage that you need to read in order to understand my value proposition. Do you want to do this? Would you like to learn more? Best, Sarah. Boom. Don't give me a bunch of garbage. Life is too short.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, but and I agree with Joshua. Like usually you can tell very easily because it feels templatized, right? Like hi, insert first name, comma. I noticed that you studied at something. Like I've had so many people, reach to me recently. Like I love your work at Landa Club, and I'm like I updated my my LinkedIn, and somehow ended up as my job, or I'm an advisor at certain startups. But it's like if the person would actually had seen my LinkedIn, would have realized that I don't work there. I'm an advisor. Like, why are you selling me? I said Zoom for my startup at a startup where I'm an advisor. It just makes sense. It doesn't add up.
Sure.
The way that it's worked for me, there's kind of 2 things that have worked for me. One is actually looking for someone that you actually needed. I'll even say that one of my co-founders needed to get his USB expedited because his wife is American, yet they weren't approving it. So he literally found the contact who's like the consulate general in Monterrey, and like sent the WhatsApp like, hey, I need this, and it worked out. They actually gave him his visa, so it worked. And he just said like, I apologize, I got it this way, and I do say sorry, but I do need this resolved, and it worked out. And I have had success just like actually picking somebody that I truly wanted to connect with. The other thing that worked for me was being like trying to just build LinkedIn as a network, just like making an automated message, yes, but it simply says like your profile, let's connect. I literally got called out by somebody like nice automated email message, sorry. And I said, you caught me. This is actually me. I do like your profile. And we actually ended up chatting it up. And now we just set up a call. So if you kind of like in Spanish, like bajar la bola, it's like if somebody can help me out.
That's a tough one. I
And
was thinking.
I'm trying to like put it into
If you
sports.
can
Like if you
just level
catch
with
the
me.
ball, yeah, and just get level with that person, and if
Yeah.
he feels it's real, then you can take it from there. And even if it like started on the wrong foot, you can actually end up in a good position. And I'll say that even just small automation, like looking at other people's profiles but not actually doing anything, like I remember being added by one of the Rappi co-founders. Like I stalked him, not, I can't recall if it was automation or not, but I was like, should I send an intro? Like, nah, he'll just say like, I won't connect. And like a few hours later, he sent a connection to me, and I was like, okay, I mean, this is pretty cool, and I accepted the connection, and voila. So I do think there's power in automation. I think that if you make it like too obvious, and if you use too many of these like insert keywords and insert, career advancements or racing, as you said, like things that are out there in the news, it feels weird when you just say like typically like, I like your profile, and I just want to connect. Odds are they might still say it's automation, but it's easier to kind of just say yes, it is. I agree, I accept, I admit it, but I do want to connect, and you can take it from there, and then you can make it much more personal with an actual interaction. And like my automation with a poll is a one single message: I like your profile, I want to connect. And if they say no, that's it. If they challenge it, I kind of go with the flow, and if they accept, then I grow my network, and I then try to actually sell what I want to sell and see where that takes me.
So
I,
it's interesting.
Daniel, go ahead,
Sorry, go
Sarah.
ahead, Josh.
I want to share with you like the most magical moment I've had in the last 6 months. There's a guy on TikTok of all places who does sales training. He has like these little tips, and I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. I'm like, our team could benefit from this. And I was like, hey, we're interested. What's up? And he's like, you can send me a text. You can call me. And I was just like, no, here's my number. Like, contact me when you get a second. This dude calls me like straight up. He's like, hey, this is Matt Easton. I'm like, okay, are you going to transfer me to a representative or what's the deal? He's like, no, it's Matt Easton with Easton University. I'm like, is it really you though? And he just was straight up like, yeah, dude, I'm calling you. What's up? I'm like, awesome. All right, I get it. Like, there is something about the authenticity of people who are willing to pick up the phone and who are willing to show up in person. And to your point, Daniel, hey, listen, I'm angry that you used AI to contact me on LinkedIn, but I think you're pretty interesting. Let's keep chatting. It all kind of works. So that was one of my magical moments the last 6 months.
One thing that I also think is really important to bear in mind is everybody's audience is very different. Everybody's service, Daniel, what we were talking about. So really thinking about tailoring, if you are doing these automated messages to that audience, what's going to speak to them. So something I do, and I'm sure my emails, can be templated, is I go through the effort for each person, or when I see startups that had gotten recent funding, of making sure that they do not have a recruiter or people person, because then I look like an idiot that I should be educated enough to know. So I will only reach out to founders that do not have somebody sitting in that seat. So anybody that's doing business development for me is trained to look through all of their employees. Yes, I get that all the time. Like, I had to laugh when you said that. Startup Experts comes up on top of my business. And I love the work you're doing at Startup Experts. And, not really getting that this is a nonprofit that I started a chapter of versus, my full-time role.
Which is great because it helps you filter out the automation.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And now, like, if they actually paid attention, then you'll notice that, and it works in your favor. And I agree with you. Like, some of those little, or not little, rather, but those details where, as you said, like paying attention if they have an HR person or not, does help. One thing, however, that I don't want to say like I'd challenge, but like, wouldn't there be scenarios where somebody with people person, they're growing at such a rate that maybe they need more of the same or somebody better, or they're not happy with who they have, whether this is an external resource or whether it's an internal resource? Because this is something that has happened to us, where I even want to talk about one that was very interesting, where doing recruitment, we were brought in by this person whom I met, like, this was networking. He brought us in there. About a year later, his boss like texted me, and I'm like, why would this guy text me? And then what happened was, like, I had to replace the person that brought me in as a consultant, right? So it was a very like interesting scenario because I was in a position where I knew I had to replace the person that brought me, but I didn't want to do it. But at the same time, if I didn't, then we as a company would most likely be fired, right? Anyway, it ended up, working out. We helped him land another job, and we ended up, replacing him with a customer. But what I wanted to get at is, even in that scenario where this person brought us in there, and we worked great for about a year, there was a point where even if they had an HR person that brought us in and we were a team, they still needed that extra oomph or that extra, effort from an external team. So I know that your strategy definitely makes sense. Like I agree with it. But
Sure.
what do you think about those where it
So
could still
what
work out?
what I do sometimes is when I see, and this is something actually that I need somebody to help me with, there are many small businesses that as you connect with them will invite you to follow their page. The minute you connect with them, there's a connection on LinkedIn. So what I may do if I see a founder that is interesting, but already maybe has a junior HR person or whatnot, I may connect with them and add in that note, congrats on your recent funding, best wishes, or let us know if we can ever help in any way. But I don't do a purposeful candid reach out email. I kind of use those reach outs to startups that have generally gotten a recent round of funding and talking about making it more specific. I tailor it in reading the article about that, or just lists that I'm on of congratulations on your recent funding of X amount. So I'm aware that this is really, and sure, that's a filter. You can compile, you can download off of Crunchbase, but I think it's still a little bit more personal that, you know where you're coming from when you kind of see that information.
Can I pop in with just maybe the other side of the table here for a second? If you see somebody raise a round of funding and you really want to talk to them, wait 2 weeks. It sounds counterintuitive, but that first day the SEC filing hits and it's like, you've raised $5 million. And you get 50 emails that say, I'm sure your inbox is flooded right now that you've announced your funding raise. Yeah, delete, 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 delete.
Yep.
2 weeks later, it's like, oh, you know what? All right, the fog has cleared. I do need some of this. It is important that I fix this problem now that I have money to fix it.
So Josh, I'm actually gonna 300% agree with that, but also up the ante there that I do not reach out to a startup when they're funding. I actually have it set on 2 months or between six weeks and 2 months in arrears. Like the minute someone gets funding, put it away, note, and if it's myself doing the business development or someone else, go back to now I'm in, I'm actually so far behind in that I'm in September. But it's once that dust settles, I've been on the other side being at a startup when there was funding received, and you are in no means ready to bring in all these fractional folks. It's like you're dealing with marketing, you're dealing with potentially changing your business.